Attention! Please check what time it is. Everyone, check. You can put it in the comments. Did you look? Not only did you all see a different time, but you used different devices. Some people looked at the wall, some at the clock on their desk, and most of you looked at the corner of your computer or phone screen. The most expensive way to check the time is to take a glance at your very own Rolex watch. I think only a hermit could not have heard about this famous brand. After all, having a Rolex on your wrist is the ultimate status symbol. Braggadocios rappers sing about them, and cool guys flex them on the big screen. These watches represent the status of their owner and have made billions for the Rolex company. Now, it's not a brand for the poor, or even for the rich, but for the coolest of the cool. But it started out a simple watch brand. Well, almost. Let's go back 110 years to the old European elite. There were two guys living in London, Hans Wilsdorf and Alfred Davis. The first man is a dreamer, an orphan with millions of ideas, but without a penny in his pocket. The second man is rich, but lacking ideas. Alone, these guys are unremarkable. But with Hans's ideas and Alfred's ideas, they could start their project. Hans walked the streets of London and noticed that most of the watches men used were not very good at all. First of all, they time the time as they please. This is completely unacceptable for real gentlemen. They cannot afford to be late for work or for a date or even for dinner. Secondly, the watch was on a chain, hung on a jacket or coat. Hans noticed that these watches could easily be stolen in the hustle and bustle of city life. This called for the creation of accurate wristwatches for men. The issue was that the gentlemen felt that they could not wear something that resembled women's jewellery. That's right, at the time, wristwatches were not seen as masculine things to wear. Hans was faced with a difficult task. He had to create an accurate watch that would appeal to men. A lot of doubters at the time said it was impossible to fit a highly accurate mechanism into something the size of a wristwatch. We should let these naysayers talk to the people who said that a phone can't possibly work without a wire. It's time to put all the naysayers in a room together so they can have their own party. Hans was a smart man. He ignored the doubters, and armed with Alfred's money, he started experimenting. His experiments lasted for 45 days. Only the Rolex people know what was done to make the watches the way they are. Nevertheless, a month and a half later, Hans's watches received the certificate of accuracy that had never before been awarded to a wristwatch. This was the company's first real step to success. But Hans didn't stop there, and how could he stop when there was still progress to be made and, most importantly, some bigwigs to fund his work? So, armed with a new pile of cash from Alfred, he continued his research. We don't know whether or not he knew where he would take it next. After 4 years of hard work, mistakes, and an awful lot of money, the company got one step closer to success. The mechanism of the watch was awarded Class A, which previously had only been awarded to marine chronometers. This was the first time when Alfred didn't regret pouring so much money into the company. After all, the company had started to generate a small profit. Now the founders faced one of the most important tasks. At the end of the day, names make the first impression. The genius Hans Wilsdorf, who developed the unique mechanism, got stuck on coming up with a name. It had to be something light that would fit on the watch style. Put your own ideas in the comments. The surnames of the founders didn't sound right, and they were too long. Some other great words were either already taken or did not come to Hans's mind. Therefore, he found a simple solution. He took the consonants and some other letters from the alphabet and made them into a random combination. The result was Rolex. It was a word that would fit onto the watch face and sounded great. The Rolex company was then registered on November 15, 1915. The company was getting closer and closer to success every day. Wristwatches finally became fashionable for men, and people started to boast about the accuracy of their watches in small circles. Then the fashion became widespread. Then, just at that time, the world was plunged into the First World War. Many companies shut down, were destroyed, or contributed to the war effort. That was especially true for companies who produced non-essential items. People had bigger things to worry about than wristwatches. The Rolex company was doomed. But as history shows, when one window closes, a second opens and offers new possibilities. Hans managed to take advantage of the situation by giving people something useful and still managing to make a profit. It turned out that wristwatches were much more convenient on the battlefield than pocket watches, so Rolex was thrust into the international market. Other than being a benefit for both the soldiers and the company, it helped reach the brand's target audience. It helped to figure out who needed wristwatches. First of all, it was men in professions such as pilots, researchers, divers, and others who were inconvenienced by pocket watches. The company was now able to focus on its customer base and continue their scientific research. The war, as strange as it might sound, was a huge help to Rolex. Although there was one issue. Politics aside, Hans is German, and he had to go to another country for his own safety. Without hesitation, he gathered his belongings and moved to Switzerland. Hans set up the company's headquarters in Geneva, where it remains to this day. As soon as he resolved the German problem, a new problem arose due to the war. The prices for the components to make watches increased sharply. This harmed the financial side of the business and forced Hans to make another brilliant decision. It really did. Why buy parts from other people if you can produce them yourself? Therefore, from that point on, Rolex is one of the few companies that produces all of the components of their own watches. They don't buy any parts from anyone else to this day. He is his own master. Once the dust had settled on the war, Rolex continued their research. This time they wanted to make the first dust-proof and waterproof watch in the world. Get a load of this, the naysayers said. It can't be done. And no matter how hard the advertisers tried, people simply couldn't believe that they had done it. Therefore, Rolex had to become an innovator in advertising. They somehow managed to convince a swimmer from England to wear the watch while crossing the English Channel. The swim lasted for around 10 hours. The watch should have gotten wet, fallen apart, and become fish food, but it didn't. When the swimmer got out of the water, the watch was in perfect working condition. Testing it in the real world was the most effective means of advertising. People flocked to the shops. Everyone wanted a watch they could swim with. And so, do you think they stopped their research here? No. They only just got into first gear. Next, they decided to produce a device of this accuracy that could save lives. And that's just what they did. Rolex worked on a watch for civil aviation pilots crossing time zones. The pilots needed to know the time in several places around the world at once. Success continued to follow the company. They were sky high in the truest sense of the word. Rolex was ahead of its time. In the 30s, they invented an automatic winding system, a clock rotor. This made the watch much simpler to use and made a lot of money for the company. Rolex was pumping out their products on a conveyor belt and patenting their discoveries to stay ahead of the competitors. As a result, no other watchmaking companies could catch up with them. They were the world leaders in their field. And once they put out watches that told not only hours and minutes, but also days and weeks, all other companies could do nothing but despair. Rolex firmly established their brands as superior to their competitors. Hans & Co. were monopolists and established their brand and set the prices as they pleased. The other companies had to either struggle to keep up with Rolex or leave the game with tears in their eyes. Rolex was so high on their own success that they didn't offer any discounts or loyalty schemes to regular customers. They didn't even arrange their own sales. Nevertheless, they didn't lose customers. They wanted a unique watch which was fit for all conditions, which once again proved how powerful the brand was. Rolex is an amazing company that was built on war, crisis, and disbelief. It has a chaotic history of ups and downs and has survived to this day. But what is Rolex now? Hans Wilsdorf, the mastermind behind Rolex, died in 1960. In his 79 years, he created a huge empire based on his watches. There is a street named after him in Geneva and a bridge over the Arve River. But Rolex did not die with its founder. It only grew larger. Hans had the foresight to bequeath all of his shares to his own charitable foundation, avoiding the problem of the company falling apart in the hands of its incompetent heirs. Today, everything has changed. You hardly see any Rolex ads. Why is that? Only products that are not selling well need advertising. Rolex is already an established brand. The company may not actively be involved in research anymore, but Rolex has retained its elegance and heritage. They know their clientele, and it's not the middle class or even the rich. Their clientele is at the very top. Politicians, businessmen, Hollywood stars, and drug lords. Therefore, people at the top have featured in advertisements throughout the company's history, such as the director of Titanic, tennis champion Roger Federer, golf star Tiger Woods, American President David Eisenhower, and diva Marilyn Monroe. The task of testing out the 18-karat gold cased watch that told the time, date, and day of the week was not given out to any old bum, but to the US President Lyndon Johnson. Well, there is a way to reach any audience. Now, during the internet age, Rolex doesn't sell their products online. only fakes can be found online. The counterfeit market shifts around 40 million units a year. It would take endless lawsuits to fight it. But what would be the point? With demand comes supply and a price. A real Rolex watch is superior to the counterfeit version. The fakes give the consumers a taste of the unique watch before buying one. But of course, not everyone can afford it. In any case, there are only a few outlets that sell Rolex, and they are located in the most prestigious places in the world. Some might think that production has slowed down, but I can tell you that Rolex produces more than 2,000 watches a day, around 650 to 800,000 a year, and still, demand and the amount of people who can afford to buy the product is increasing. The company is thriving. Yes, and perhaps the most expensive watch was sold for $17,752,500 to an unknown collector, Mr. X. Rolex frequently cooperate with the police and international search parties. Each watch has a serial number with a special engraving which can be used to identify the owner. In a detective story, an incident occurred on a fishing trip in 1966. A clever international con artist killed a man and dumped his body into the sea. They were able to identify and find him thanks to the unique markings on his watch. After all, as we heard earlier, these watches are waterproof. So, Rolex helped find the murderer and was sentenced to life in prison. Although for many customers, this is more of a con than a pro. Rolex has very wealthy and sometimes secretive clientele. I don't think they would want to be found. Another feature of the company today is that it's almost completely run behind closed doors and keeps a strict code of silence. Its shares are not on the stock exchange and they do not disclose financial statements. The only thing we know is that in 2016, Rolex placed 64th on the Forbes list. At the time, the value of the company was estimated at $8.8 billion with sales of $4.7 billion. Although some say they have already completely revolutionized the watch and cannot outdo themselves, they are still doing some research. In 2012, they created a mechanism that could work in a second time zone. In addition, the watch is equipped with an annual calendar that only needs to be reset once a year. This innovative design was called Saros, after the astronomical phenomenon on which the calendar is based. Who knows what else the company could come out with in the future? Well, we can conclude that the success of the company was due to Hans Willdorf's innovative design and Alfred Davis's financial backing, amongst other factors. The key to their success was that they did not shy away from challenges, but embraced them. Nowadays, the success of Rolex is built on hype and exclusivity. According to the laws of economics, the more mysterious the product is, the more attention it will attract. So, I hope that you will get a chance to hold a Rolex in your hands and see for yourself if it really is so great, or if it's all a bit overblown.